Good morning, it's the last day of February today, so supposedly if you are basing your seasons on the meteorological office, it's the last day of winter, tomorrow's the first day of spring. That's more of a convenience for the Met Office than it is actually have any real meaning out here in the wilds. Really we'd be looking for spring more to be kind of coming in after the equinox, which of course is another 21 days away or 22 days away. But as you can see, we've had a little dump of snow overnight. Nothing to write home tomorrow about, but makes everything just look a bit prettier, I suppose. But it's a bit wet underfoot still, and it is cold. Again, I feel my hands freezing while holding the camera like I usually do. It was cold enough for a frost last night, but it's warmed up enough this morning to make everything gone very slushy and back to its fairly typical March-like morass of mud, which is what March is normally like. We're in a different part of the woods. We're back in this area where there's this row kind of been here, showing evidence of a row moving through. Just going to go back into the droppings that we saw almost a couple of weeks ago now. Again, we'll just have a look at these droppings to see how they've aged. So that kind of, again, it's an ongoing process just to understand how things age with time, which gives you a feel for how signs age over periods of time. And of course we can carry on doing this as long as we like, so we get a real feel, an instinctive feel for how signs do change over time. I'm having to swap my hands quite a lot because it is really quite chilly, so I apologise for the camera moving in and out. Winds coming in from just from the west, just hitting the side of the face here, and it's really got a raw edge to it. So we'll see how long I could go without losing the feeling in my fingers. So now we're just going to moving along. Again, this is a kind of a time of year when everything starts to slow up. Everybody thinks like the first flush of spring is a time for rejoicing and jump up and down, but as you go through till March into April, it's a very, very lean part of the year. It's because of course everything is beginning. I mean, the animals are beginning to think about those ones that tend to have offspring in the springtime become very secretive. The plant life that comes through initially, there's the kind of, if you think about the stuff that comes through, particularly in this neck of the woods first, is not really edible, and all that kind of winter stuff has disappeared, or the late autumn stuff has all disappeared. So in March, April and into even early May you can have a very, very lean period, and of course it's no accident that March is the time for Lent, which is the time of fasting, because this is the period of the year actually where it can be the trickiest really of the whole of all the parts of the year and the seasons to make a living from the land. You really kind of, you've used up all your winter stocks really, or your supplies. You've lasted through the winter, and now you're kind of really wanting the kind of the flush of spring to come in now, because you're beginning to struggle. And of course, if we get a kind of a late cold spell, which we have done in this neck of the woods, 4 years ago we got a quite a sizable dump of snow towards the end of March, and that causes problems. We lost a lot of lambs because of course the sheep are were well into lambing by then. We lost a lot of lambs, a lot of sheep, lost some ponies from the hill as well. They died just because it's a tough time of the year to have to live through not only meagre food resources, but just also cold as well. Right, well, unfortunately here the signs are just covered by a bit of snow. I don't really want to disturb them because the whole idea is that we leave them as much as we can just to see how they react to, this time it's going to be frost and snow action on them, to see how they've altered. So what we'll do, I'll show you actually what we mean. There we go, you see, you can see them sticking through, so they're still there, but I don't want to kind of take the snow away. I don't want to disturb it anyway, so I'm just going to leave that as is. But one thing that snow is good for is checking for signs of animal activity. Again, we're on the same track that we were, and I'm just moving through just to see if there's anything. And actually my eye, it's always good when you're tracking, rather than to kind of track and move at the same time, is to look and then move. I don't know if you've seen behind me, I just seen in this tree, you might just hear them. It's a whole cacophony of starlings all kicking off in this tree just behind me, making an absolute racket. But anyway, sorry to go back, it is, rather than to move and track at the same time, is to use your eye to see where you can follow. If you're following a track, try and find the position where you can, the furthest position you can see, and then move to that. This just helps, just because you end up, if you stay at the ground and move at the same time, you're not really paying attention to what you're doing, and equally you tend to walk on the track that you're trying to follow, because you are watching the thing in front of you. So I can see even from here, unfortunately I shall try and turn you guys so you can actually see. A bit difficult doing it this way, but we've got this track coming through here. There's nothing on it apart from the one that my dog has made. I'm just going to move again so I can see where it turns. And since this snow came in overnight, I can see that there's been nothing on it since the snow's come, so I can thereby be rest assured that nothing's moved through there. So we just backtrack and we'll move elsewhere. But that's quite an interesting, again, I've stopped just because I've seen a track on the ground, and the same thing, see what I've got, make a judgment, and then it's nothing for me to be interested in, I can move on. But again, it's about stopping, making a judgment about something, and then moving, rather than to try and track and move at the same time. Okay, so again, I'm walking on the track that I made coming in. A stick is always a useful thing, a tracking stick. Well, this is a stick. Has many fuses. It's a very useful thing to have for tracking. For start, you can just move things on the ground without having to bend down all the time. It also gives you a measuring stick if you want to measure the stride of an animal, just to get some idea of a position of the next sign. If you're looking for a ground sign, you know, like a print, or you want to just get an idea of what the size of the animal, just like with the deer, the size of the difference between the print on the ground will give you the shoulder height of a deer, for instance. So this is a useful thing to have. I find it gives you more range as well. When you're kind of moving, you can then move it around in a good sweep. I mean, I could sweep around about 1.5 meters with this, and of course that will cover most animal tracks that we cover in the UK. There's not going to be anything really that's going to have a stride more than 1.5 meters. And also, if you lose a track, one thing we have to be very careful of as trackers is that we don't start making up our own tracks. It's one of those things, you know, it's we can, just because we want to show off, or we want to be tired, and we just think, well, that's obviously, you know, I can see this track and actually there isn't one. One good way of actually therefore dealing with the track, if you got your last track and say I got to my position here and I've lost the track, I can't see the next one on the ground, is to then put my stick in the ground here. This is the position of the last track, and then a good idea is just to then make a circle, a circuit of your area in a wide circle, about a couple of meters in diameter perhaps. Again, you're looking for a sign on the ground, and of course you've got your stick there as an indicator of where that last sign was. And then if you can't find it, extend the circle, come back round, perhaps go back as well. Again, this might be, particularly if you're dealing with human and you're trying to track a human, this human might have backtracked just by walking backwards on their own prints, and then you might find that this movement has been off the side, and this is actually a feint. It's an attempt to put you off the trail. So this stick has a multitude of uses, and also you can just use it for balance, particularly when you're tracking on uneven ground, just to give yourself a sense of balance. But also tracking someone with a stick, i.e. someone who's walking with a stick, gives another spore sign. You know, it's another print for, you'll be watching this kind of point in the ground, and it does give indication also if someone perhaps is getting tired, when you start seeing that the point go in much more frequently. You know, so it's you're getting some indication perhaps of the person you're tracking perhaps becoming much more tired. It's reduced pace, and things like that. So anyway, moving along, we've had a lot of rain. We've had, yesterday we had a sizable chunk of rain come through here. Therefore the tracks are all very washed out, which is interesting, because of course that means that any track you're seeing now, if it looks very fresh, it will be very fresh, because the last rain we would have been the snow. So a track that looks like it hasn't been washed out gives you a time frame. It must be after that rain, because that rain was heavy enough to wash most tracks away. Again, it's a point to stop, have a look and observe. Again, you're looking not just down the track that you're following, but you're also looking off to the sides in an arc. Again, it's useful to move your head than it is to move your eyes. It just takes less energy to move your head than keep moving your eyes in your head, so you're expending less energy. Your eyes don't become tired. And again, you're looking for the immediate distance, the middle distance, and the far distance. And again, you're kind of scanning just to see what is around and about. Okay, and then we're going to move off again. Right, I'm just going to turn off for a minute, warm my hands up, and we should come back. Off down this this break in the plantation, which is quite an interesting little break. The dogs get quite interested in here, which is suggestive that there's quite a bit of animal activity in here. It's also quite useful because it's not on the standard human-made footpath, so I'm reasonably sure that we haven't had a huge amount of human activity walking up and down this break, so any kind of visual signs will tend to be animals other than human. Now, it's rained, and also we've had snow, and the snow's melted, and one useful thing that does occur is that that kind of will, if you've got kind of indentations in the ground, and particularly if you've got the soil for it, means you get little kind of puddles forming where visual signs like prints have been, particularly when you're dealing with an animal either's got a hoof, like a cloven hoof, that tends to go more into the ground than say a dog's do. I mean, just watching my dog, as she walks across the same ground, even though it's wet, she's not making the same indentation into the ground as some of these other marks. So that's indicative you've got something that either this animal, I'll show you in a minute what I'm talking about, where these prints are must be either heavier than the dog, or the actual foot itself must be more capable of pushing into the ground, the soft soil. So what we've got here, I'll turn you down. This is a classic sign. This here, and we can see this little indentation. It's filled up with water. We've even got, I'll move some stuff away. We've even got this piece of rush that's been pushed in as well. Okay, so that's quite a classic sign of something that has with an animal that's passed through and pushed into the ground. Okay, now with the stick, which I've jammed into the ground over here, if we can find another one, we're kind of thinking an animal, if this is going to be row, shoulder height, probably, I'll show you I know roughly it's about that length. So if we start making put on our ground and we start to visual around, and I actually get one just here, so I shall turn you around. So the first print is there. We've got a second print just here. Okay, so that, if I turn my stick up right now, will give me, if I can show you, which is really difficult to do with a camera. Okay, so there's my stick. I know the shoulder height, therefore, is where my finger is, roughly. So that would be shoulder height for whatever it is we're following. So we've got one there, two there, and again, we stop. And this is kind of a technique you can do, which is pacing, which is you put your foot, which is quite useful to do if you're, tracking a human, for instance. Put your foot alongside of the track you made, stand and look, then move forward. And we've got another one there, which again, if I put my stick down, is exactly the right distance. Again, another one just there. Again, same thing's happened. We've got build up of water. And now my eye is keying in. I can see these prints. Another one there. Okay. And from there, another one there. I have to stand because actually I'm having a problem finding the next set. So I extend my eye forward, and also I look left and right. Now what we have got is a break left, and we haven't got a break right. So I've got a break that way, just around this tree, but I haven't got a break right. So again, I'm making a deduction. If I move off to the right hand side, because I'm going to be fairly secure that there's going to be nothing row size moving into this bit of woodland. I have got tracks moving left, but they're kind of low tracks, they're not the way that a deer steps. Exactly, foxes do exactly the same. They won't leave a mark on the ground because of course their bellies are far enough up. But things like rabbits and badgers and stuff, because their bellies are close to the ground, they scuff the ground into one continuous track. So I'm looking more for step marks, visual marks, rather than scuff marks. So I move around. Again, this is a case of where I know where my last track is. I've got this track running in here, which looks like it's quite a sizable track. You can see it's very obvious, moving in slow and in a kind of S way around into this break. Again, I move back to my my last known position, which is just there. My last known one. I put my stick in the ground. That gives me the last position. Okay, I know the length, so I put, and there we go. It is actually comes a lot easier once you know the stride of the animal you are following, to extend it using your stick like this, and then just to skim it around and just see what you can find. And again, just where my tip is, there is a little indentation just there, and that's exactly where I would expect to find my next print. Okay, and then we do exactly the same thing again, and again we are getting slight indentations. Now again, some of these signs, depending on the soil, will make different impact. So that one's quite boggy back there. It gets a bit dry here, so you're not, even though it's still cloven hoofed, it's not making the deep impact into the ground. So anyway, we have got a slight indentation here. This is where you have to be really careful you're not making up your own tracks in your mind. So you have to be very careful that you're not actually just following something that doesn't exist at all. And just like once you get more into doing this, you actually begin to get an eye in, and you begin to see what's on the ground. My instinct, which instinct is built out of experience, it's built out of just a feeling. We all have them, just that we don't use them very often nowadays. It's amazing how well our instincts work, which we actually get to use them. We are just like any other animal. We have instinctual behaviour and instincts, a sixth sense, which comes from things that our brains unconsciously are aware of, just that we are not consciously aware of. And I think this animal did turn, so I'm going to carefully walk round. I also have to be careful that my dog has been forward of me. So now this again, now this is an interesting little thing. Again, this is a sign of human activity, and this is what we have to be careful of, which is that if we were doing this kind of tracking humans, of course, this is what we would call an event. Something's happened in here, and we have to make a judgment as to what's happened. Now we got the same thing on the ground. We've got clays on the ground, broken clays on the ground. Looking around, trying not to disturb the scene at all. Now, just because this is human-made doesn't mean that other animals would use it. I mean, Roe might come in here just because it's an interesting break. They would be curious just as much as anything else. My dog has gone off that way as well with an interesting nose. This is where dogs come in really useful. Of course, they're following a great scent pattern on the ground and in the air. So, of course, using dogs is hugely important because there's a whole world of scent that we just don't have the nose for, whereas they see this the environment's very much in scent as well as in visual. So we're just looking, we have got activity through there, but what I would say is there's nothing on the ground here that is indicative of Roe within the last 24 hours. But anyway, we have to make deductions about what this was. This is a break in the trees. It's very human-made. You can tell that just by cut marks on the tree. Someone has come through here, cut branches away, made a small clearing area. And my instinct says that this is a place where a clay pigeon shoot was set, and they were shooting out somewhere, which is why you got clays on the ground as well. Again, this is exactly the same kind of deductions you would make about if you came across a campsite, some overnight break or something like that. Exactly the same kind of deductions you would carry out if you were doing that kind of tracking. So the row might have moved around down there and then come back out again. And we're just going to move off down. Once you've got your eye in, you begin to see I've got another little indentation on the ground there, but it's interesting that the sharp reed is sitting on top of it, isn't bent. Sometimes you have to get very detailed about the tracks that you are following, even down to the use of some long tweezers just to move material around, just to see what's underneath without making too much disturbance to the actual visual sign itself. Now, one thing I've got in my favour, however, is that I know that as we head further down, I found a lot of evidence for deer print further down towards the main track, which is just a bit further down. So I am fairly certain that this animal moves up and down this line. Again, you'd want your dog working behind you as such, or quite close to you, because quite obviously I'm just out for a walk really, I'm not here to use her properly, but because she's walking in front, she is actually making a lot of disturbance to the signs, just because the snow's on the ground and that distracts the eye. But once you take away the visual impact of your dog prints, which you can then focus in on, you know what to discount. What I would say is I don't think this row, again you've got very ephemeral marks, very insubstantial. Here, again, you've got this quite obvious impact of a print on the ground. This wasn't my dog. It's got the shape and feel of a cloven hoof animal, the way that it's pushed the ground down. If it's the same animal, we do exactly the same. We know that's the height, and we're looking again for a print that's somewhere off in that direction. Now, just like with humans, not all stripe pattern will be exactly the same. It really depends on what this animal's doing. Just like with a human, sometimes the print will be shorter because the ground will determine it. Sometimes it's just because, you know, the animal is turning this way or slightly that way to kind of feed or to put its nose to the ground or something like that. It's exactly the same with humans. Just like with the human, if the human's going uphill, the stripe pattern will be shorter, and if it's going downhill, the stripe pattern will be longer. And if it's traversing, then sometimes the stripe pattern on the outside will be shorter to the one on the inside. So it's kind of it's not an absolute given you'll be looking for a print exactly on the length, but it gives a good indication. And I'm seeing things, but I'm not entirely sure I'm happy with them. It's always good to get down on the ground as well, to kneel rather than try and see, because once you get kneeling, you get much more of a, because you'll see the dips and any kind of undulations in the ground far better than standing up high. It's just like with in aerial photography. It's much better to do air photography when you've got a low sun, an oblique sun, because then you get to see the shadows caused by all the undulations. And this is exactly the same with tracking. If you can get down close to the ground, then you can see a lot more than if you just stand up high and try and see. I think what we're going to do, I'm going to warm my hands up, we're going to move further down and just see what we've got on the track further down. Here is fox. I'll just show you a fox print. Ugh. Just down here, quite classically fox. It's fox because various things, a stepped pattern like that, 1, 2, bomb, 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 which is a fox stepping lightly through the undergrowth, which is indicative of how they move. It's also, you can discount the other one, so it's like it's not rabbit because it's too big. It's not badger because it's badgers would be wide, and also you'd see the effects of the belly on the ground. It's also quite narrow. It's dog-like. I mean, it's kind of the size of, you'd say, of something like a terrier, but it's kind of narrowish, which is indicative of fox, a kind of narrow print where the two outside pads sit back from the front two pads. So it's quite indicative of fox. And the third giveaway, which is quite the obvious one, is the fact that my dog, when she retched it, kind of met it, immediately started following it that way, and that's indicative of her reaction to having a fox print. Now this fox is moving that way towards the track I was coming from, like that. And equally, because the marks are on the ground, ignore some of these because some of these are my dogs, but because it's on top of the snow, we know that therefore this fox moved through after the snow had come. So this is kind of classic time for a fox, kind of very early morning, just the sun coming up, kind of just at the dusk, just moving through this area. So we've got fox. As for my roe, not a huge amount. Again, I kind of was going to move down to this track area, which I'm just doing. Oops, now breaking my own rule of tracking and also walking at the same time. We get down to here, and of course we've got a very good medium here for tracking, which is mud. And all manner of prints on here, but where I found the most obvious prints is just along this edge here. You need to get a lot of prints coming along on this edge. One characteristic of this row, if it's a single row, is it's the way that it moves up the edge of the track rather than in the middle. It always seems to keep to the right hand side. I suspect it's a way of, if danger should present itself, it could easily just move into the scrub. It feels safer there than on the other side, where there's not really much for it to kind of suddenly take evasive action. So it's just moving up this edge of the track, and there's no real evidence at the moment for anything that looks like a print on a row, which means therefore that this row hasn't been this way recently, which is interesting. So we'll move further down. Even with the rain, because this is quite clayey just here, I would expect to see some print if a row had been moving that way within the last week. I'm just looking at this one as well, and I'm not seeing anything either. Get down the ground, just have a look. No. Okay, move across. You never know, might be unlucky. Okay, we'll keep moving around. Again, we're looking at a row. It's probably got quite a large territory here. Although we've got a resident population here, doesn't mean that it always exists in this piece of woodland. Because of the way that roe are, they're not just a woodland creature. They are also on open ground, which actually is the reason why they've been so successful over the last couple of decades. because even though there's been a loss of woodland, they've able to expand the ranges because they're able to use open farmers' fields and open ground, whereas the other deer species like reds and stuff like that are very much a woodland species, unless you get the reds of Scotland, of course, which are open moorland animals. I think we can safely say that this row hasn't been along this track edge recently, so we're just wandering along. I'm not picking up anything. I think that's indicative. Ever since that scat, or the dropping from the row, there's not been a huge amount of evidence for it being around here recently. And of course, there being lots of shooters in this neck of the woods. And on saying that, I think we've got a very old print just here of a tiny one. And I know there is a small one in here. I've tracked this one before. There's quite a small row, but this one is quite old, just because there's no definition of the two toes inside the print. They're very much indentations. Also, it's doing exactly what I expected of this row, is that it's moving along this edge of the track as well, which again is this kind of empathetic relationship with the animal that is you're tracking. Once you get to know its mannerisms, you know its behaviours. Yeah, there's a bit more of a definition of this one just down here. You'll be surprised how small these things. You have to remember the print actually is the bit in the bottom. People make the mistake of thinking the print is actually this bit on the top, and actually no, the print, which shows the size of the animal, is this thing right down here at the bottom of the impression. And you can just see where I've got my fingernail, that is the divider between the two, well, they're actually nails, but we're going to call them the two hooves of the two toes of this animal. But as I've said before, they're actually called nail walkers because they walk on their nails. So we're moving through again. This is a different size animal. If I put my measuring stick down, this is a different size row from the one we were in the other woodlands. This is a small one. It's about two-thirds the size of the other one we were following inside there. So we're moving through. Yeah, it's a very, I would say that sign is quite old. The way that this ground holds these kind of signs, I would suggest that that's probably at least a couple of weeks, if not older. And this is the interesting thing about signs, aging signs, is that you seem to think there's kind of a magic art aging signs, and actually there isn't. It's all about judgment call and deductions. There's a certain amount of scientificness in it, in terms of that you can use what you get, the idea of prints on top of prints on top of prints, or signs on top of signs on top of signs, gives you a sense of age. But this is the idea of, you get age a visual sign purely by experience and deduction, and there really isn't an art to it, or magic to it. It is an art form in itself, and sometimes you'll get them wrong. But as long as you learn how to fail spectacularly, you should be alright. Again, standing by the print. I know this animal was walking this way, I can tell that, but even by this print I can still tell it. And then extend forward. Sign here gets very washed out. And there we go. Well, I'm going to stop there just because we're turning back along the path we came along, and my hands are freezing. And so we'll turn off now, and we'll do some more another day.